Hello, hello everyone. Welcome to another webinar from the series Impactful Careers in Soil Regeneration. Today we have our webinar number 4, where Todd Harrington and a few other good people will talk about ecological land care, the consultant's playbook. So, reviewing this amazing series we had so far, we are talking about impactful careers in soil regeneration. We had our first webinar with Nick Padwick, talking about large-scale composting and regenerative farming. The replay is available. Just check our website. Then on the week 2, we had on-farm soil food web innovations with Ib Porub, and we have the pleasure to have Nick and Ib as mentors at Soil Food Web School. You can rewatch their webinars on our website. Last week, we heard from Reynold Flores, how he's working on tobacco farming with soil health. And today, we have the pleasure to have Todd Harrington talking about ecological land care, and we're going to hear tips and tricks on his consultant's playbook. As always, type in the chat, where are you joining from today? We love to read, where are you guys joining from? So let's review the webinar attendee guidelines. We ask you guys to be muted, and you will be muted for the duration of this webinar so we can ensure good audio quality for everyone. Please enter your questions for the panelists in the Zoom Q&A session. It will be a black bar in the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you cannot see there, probably you need to update your Zoom. Do this before the next time you're going to join us. We're going to have the staff also helping us on the chat. So if you need any support, chime in there and they're going to help. And as always, converse with the other attendees. We love to see how you guys interact every week and enjoy every single second. Okay, so recapping the topic for today. Todd Harrington, we're going to talk about the ecological land care. We're going to have these introductions for about 10 minutes. Then Todd will talk about the topic in about 45 minutes. And then we're going to hear the information about the October offer and follow up for the Q&A. We will be together for about 2 hours. And it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Elaine. Elaine, tell us a little bit about your alphabet again.
My alphabet of things like C to N ratios and fungal to bacterial ratios. And
yeah.
so we are discerning, are a lot easier to understand if we work it out into a program. So when we're looking at carbon nitrogen ratios, we know that fungi are going to do much, much better than bacteria. So we have a way to kind of tone down those bacteria. We want to make those bacteria, make sure they're all happy and not disease causers. So we've got to have that fungal component in your compost, in your soils, in your extracts, and your all of the different things that we work with here. So, knowing what the extract can do, for example, you add a certain amount of money, more money in there, not money, gosh, come on.
Biology.
Biology, good guys going in the system. So we want to see those sorts of interactions. So that's what I'm doing more and more on a daily basis, working on what do those ratios have to be in order to improve things in an already fungal dominated system, or what if it's way low in fungal organisms. And so how much, so we're working on all of those things, which will be added to the workshop that we are, that's today is here for. Yeah, you can see I'm kind of stumbling over words because it's been a kind of tough
You
to
have an
get
extra busy
there.
agenda, Elaine, so it's always mixing.
Yeah.
No worries.
So
And
how
I bet, sorry, go ahead.
we're always really interested in what has to be added, and we need to test that. And so the more you can do on that end of it, you become part of the mentor interactions going on. So we are developing those things in the school that will be able, not yet, but in the future, yes, so we can make your life easier, faster, to get to those savings that you get when you use the biology instead of toxic chemicals.
And I bet you heard about the name. Some of you saw some webinars with him before, where we have the pleasure to have Todd Harrington here with us today. Todd, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you again for having me again, Carla and Elaine and the rest of the Soil Food Web group. I'm excited to be here, and as always, I'm always happy to share my experiences working around the country and overseas in other countries. And today, hopefully, I get to share with you some of my past and present projects that I've really enjoyed working with. And today, we actually have the opportunity to meet two of my folks that I'm working with in Indiana, Tony and Troy Hinkle of Hinkle Heritage Farm. We're going to talk to them a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my past projects where I really learned to scale up the soil food web process and systems with AgroBio. I'll talk a little bit about some of my experiences presently working on some really, really interesting projects, really fun overseas and in Central America. I'm also working on with sugarcane and tobacco, which, never thought I'd be working with sugarcane and tobacco, but it's really, really exciting project. And I'll share a little bit of that experience also today. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we also have the honor to hear from Tony and Troy Hinkle about their experience. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
This is Troy Hinkle. That's Tony Hinkle. We're brothers, farmers in southwestern Indiana. I've had the pleasure of working with Todd for a little over a year and a half now, and excited to be part of this webcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm Carla Portugal, your host for today. I also have the honor to work with Dr. Elaine at the school and also have my consultancy company, and I'm based between Oregon and Brazil. And Todd, you should be able to take control of the presentation.
Cool. This is the first for me, so I may be a little delayed here, but so basically the topic today is ecological land care, the consultant's playbook. And so I'm going to share with you some of my experiences as a consultant working on some of the larger projects that I've had the opportunity to work on over the last several decades. Now I'm going to age myself, but that's okay. And so, well, I think we'll first start off with a little bit about myself and my background. I started off as a landscaper or tree care. My background originally started off in agriculture, urban forestry. That was my background and my degree. And that was back and let me see, I graduated. Here we go. I'm not even going to tell you when I graduated. It was a while ago. And in college, I always wanted to start my own business. So I started my own company called Organicare. And that was back in about 1987. And from there, I started dabbling in agriculture a little bit because really my passion was food, even from day one. But I didn't have the opportunity to work out in the farm because my dad was a big landscape company. And so, I was more into the land care part of it, which was trees and shrubs, ornamentals and turf and forestry, obviously, because I went to school for forestry. But I still had a real passion for agriculture, even though I started my business off as a land care company. And so eventually I changed my name to Harrington's Organic Land Care because I got involved in an organization called NOFA, Northeast Organic Farming. which was it started off as one of the first organic organizations in, I think, North America, was NOFA in New England. And we started a side organization called NOFA OLC, which was Organic Land Care. Because I was an early adapter, I helped on the committee, I helped write the standards, and I helped teach the course. And to date, we have, I don't even know how many certified NOFA members, but a couple thousand probably. And unfortunately, I no longer teach the course because I've been so busy with my consulting and my local company. But they really blossomed into an organization, and they offer a 1-week course, a 40-hour course, to teach people about organic land care. And we actually have organic standards and guidelines, kind of like the food industry, but for land care. So if you're not aware of it, you can go to NOFA OLC and learn about the organization and learn about our organic standards and guidelines for land care. So that's a little bit about me. I met Dr. Elaine Ingham back in the 90s because I had such a passion and interest in agriculture. Even though in land care, I was dabbling in quite a bit of different organic systems and products. But I really had a need to know why plants were not healthy, why plants were sick. And, I knew that using the chemicals and the synthetic fertilizers was really a Band-Aid effect. And once I went, I think it was actually, I was going to a lot of the Acres USA conferences. Those were some of the first organic conferences I would go to. And that's where I met Elaine in the mid-90s. And when I saw her talk, I was like, oh my God, now I understand. Like it was an epiphany. When I took her class, or when she spoke at the Acres conference, and once she talked about the soil food web thing and the microbes and the mineralizing, and I was like, oh my God, that all makes sense. This is why plants are not healthy. And everything I had been doing with the chemicals, because I was taught, the chemicals, fertilizers, and all the pesticides. And I knew I didn't want to be around the chemicals, but I knew that wasn't really what it was all about, And so, but once I saw her speak about it, and right away I was just, driven to not only learn more, but to get to know Elaine as a person. And we became friends and business colleagues since then. And I started one of maybe the second or third soil food web labs in the mid 2000s. And from there, things just kind of took off when it came to working with Elaine in the soil food web group. Back in the, I think the early 90s, Elaine, we started the first soil food web certification. We had maybe a dozen people back then. And we started kind of a group called SGI, and we were all part of this group and as a certification, soil food web certification that Elaine started back in the, I think it was probably late 90s, early 2000s. Elaine, does that sound right to you?
Yeah, because I was right at that point of we had to get out from underneath the academic thumb. We had to be doing things that would and tell the growers that what they needed to do next. And so I think, yeah, late 90s, early 2000s, right in there.
Yeah. And it was great because we would have, meetings, but we'd had annual conferences. We'd all get together and we would share our experiences with PowerPoints and things we were learning, things we were successful with, things that we were failing. And we worked collectively as a certification group. And it was great that we got to share our experiences with Elaine in these annual conferences, which we also had at my place. There's a photo here of my compost extract center, which is kind of my first development of kind of scaling up the whole compost tea and extract thing, which I started in probably about 2006 and 7. I had the opportunity to work in out west in not Arizona, in Idaho, and with Ray, what was Ray's last name? It was a company called Sustainable SSI, and they were doing compost extract on a really large scale, and they had one of the first industrial compost extractors that this gal Betsy Ross kind of developed with another person. And so I set that whole thing up here, and as you can see, I have my extractor, and I have a couple 1,000-gallon batch tanks. The center tank is more of a vortex extractor that we turned into a water system extractor that vortexes. And then in front there, you'll see our first CFT unit, continuous flow through, because we were doing a lot of vermicomposting, which we might get into talking a little bit about compost. But anyways, this is just a general photo of my first compost extract center, which from there I really scaled up from some of the projects that I got involved with, including the agrobiosystems. At that same time, I had my compost extract center in the mid-2000s. I also, working with Elaine, we started our first soil food web lab. And Chandrapa, who worked with Elaine and SSI, came to work for me full time. And we really were starting to crank. We were doing a lot of testing, quantitative, qualitative. We were also doing epifluorescence on the actives. And at the same time, we had the opportunity to do a lot of testing for other companies that were sending their samples in. Not only their compost and their soils and their extracts and their teas, but also companies that were starting to develop, I'll say it, bugs in a jug. And so, we were looking at these things under the microscope, and, they were bugs in the jug. And we know there's nothing better than, I don't want to say a wild ferment, but, the understanding the biocomplete composts and biocomplete compost extracts and biocomplete compost extract teas. There's nothing like it because of that diversity. And so that was a great opportunity to see the difference between the diversity of microbes in high quality biocomplete compost versus bugs in the jug samples that we used to get and look at under the microscope. So that was kind of cool back in the between 2008 till probably the mid 2016, 17 even. We were doing a lot of testing. So then, again, my local business, we were doing a lot of compost extracts, compost teas. I found it very challenging doing the compost teas at a larger scale. So we were getting into municipalities, doing schools, doing pastures. And so I started dabbling more with compost extract, just kind of, sleep, it wasn't activated, but it was much easier to handle and manage the extract than it was once we activated it, for all the reasons that you've seen in all the webinars. They both have their pros and cons, and we may or may not be able to talk about that today, but there's some real advantages with extract and there's some disadvantages with extract. Same with the compost teas. So moving on, again, we provided, I'm just trying to remember what some of the projects that I've had the opportunity to work on over the last few decades, not only working with landscape companies and tree care companies, but also farmers, golf courses, schools, nurseries. I've worked with many different cannabis growers over the last decade, apple orchards, vineyards. I've had a couple really neat vineyard projects, including Union Grove. Shout out to Vineyard Grove down in North Carolina. Pastures, some really interesting pasture projects. Working with other compost operations and many soil food web students. I've had the opportunity to work with them. And again, I talked a little bit about some of the research projects that we had the opportunity to work on, including the NRCS. For a couple of years, I was doing testing for them. Equipment manufacturers, organic producers, and many more. So I've really had, a lot of fun working on these many different projects, a lot of diversity here. We talk about diversity. So even with my projects, I've had a lot of diversity, and it's given me the opportunity to learn so much from many different types of projects. So I'll just kind of move on. And then I guess really the epiphany for me, or the one of the plateaus in my working with larger projects, was working with Adam York and Brad Holcomb. These two gentlemen were just amazing individuals because they're farmers that basically weren't, I guess they just wanted to start their own thing when it came to manufacturing products, including the biocomplete compost and extracts. They believed in it. They contacted Elaine, and this was probably back in 2014 and 15. And Elaine recommended me as someone to work with, and we just started working together. And not only did they become excellent clients, but we became really good friends too. They're just wonderful individuals. They're fifth generation farmers, and they continue to reinvest in regenerative farming processes, equipment, and most of their business is referral. I mean, it's amazing how successful not only they are, but also all their clients. So they're like a central hub, but they've evolved into a company where they are developing other hubs of what they do. And a lot of it's just word of mouth because of their success transitioning into a regenerative operation on a very large scale. So there's the delay. So, this is kind of just a quick overview. And we've had a couple webinars already about AgroBio and York Farm. But very impressive. Between Adam and Brad together, they farm over 20,000 acres of corn and soy. And originally it was conventional farming. Again, they were fifth generation. They didn't want to continue with the chemicals and the pesticides. They knew there was a better way. And they started dabbling with compost teas, and they found it very, very difficult at the scale that they needed to scale it at using these industrial compost tea brewers. I think they had I'd have to say maybe 7 to 10 of these 500-gallon brewers, and it took them forever to clean. And they had a lot of challenges with it, and they weren't really making compost teas. They were making more brown water than they were teas. And the results were based on the inputs or the amendments they were using, like the molasses, like the humates, like the kelps that were in the compost teas. But when it came to the biology, there really wasn't a lot there. And does everybody know why? Because of the compost. So wherever they were sourcing it out, they weren't making it themselves. When I first started with them, they were sourcing it out. And once we started assessing it, then we realized it was because they just didn't have the total food web there. And if anything, they had just bacteria. So long story short, we got them up and running, and we got them involved in doing their own microscopy and doing qualitative assessments. And they really scaled up their operation, especially when it came to extract, because, in one application, they would have to produce 100 to 150,000 gallons of compost tea. Good luck with that. So, that's why they got more into doing the extract, but then they were adding foods to it as they applied it out in the field, or they applied the foods and then the extract. But they're very, very innovative. Excuse me. And so they started developing equipment to scale up the compost extract. And I don't think we really have too many photos of that here, but again, we've gone over this on other workshops and webinars. But anyhow, they've been very successful, and they have gotten to the point now. What do we have, about 45 minutes, guys? I just want to make sure I'm not.
Yeah, 50, yeah,
Okay.
45, 50, yep.
Yeah. So a quick timeline. In 2017, they were producing about 3,500 gallons of compost tea. By 2018, we were producing between 10,000 and 20,000 gallons in 8 to 12 hours. And then in the spring 2018, they were applying between 3 to 5 gallons of compost extract in furrow. And again, I mentioned that 120 to 150 gallons per application. Now, this is in furrow. They're also doing foliar sprayings, and they made it as financial investment. About that same time, as well as Tony and Troy, they invested in a very large sprayer, which these things can cost $100,000 to $200,000. And they invested in a dedicated sprayer just for putting compost extract out and also minerals and nutrients. But it wasn't being used for any kind of pesticides or synthetic fertilizers. And at the beginning, that's the case for a lot of farmers. They just don't have the money to be able to invest in a piece of equipment like that. So you have to do a phenomenal job at cleaning all those chemicals out. And even then, it's difficult to get some of that residual out, as Tony and Troy probably know from the sprayer they had before. But anyhow, in 2019, they really got more into product development, and they just didn't feel comfortable purchasing some of these amendments and fertilizers from vendors. So they went directly to the source, and they source out the raw materials, and they manufacture their own products. And I give them a lot of kudos because not only did they purchase the raw materials, but they looked at these raw materials and how they affected the microbiology community at the same time. There's not a lot of companies out there that produce products that are looking at their products and how do those products affect the microbial communities in a negative way or a positive way. They don't really do that. Where that was their primary focus. So they hired a chemist in Utah, and he's an amazing individual that really understands biology and the sensitivity of microbes with some of these products. And so they have a great line of products that are very compatible with the biology, which there's not a lot of companies that have products like that. And so they're farmers that evolved and developed their own products for themselves. And it was in-house, but then they had so much interest from everyone else, they started their own company selling the products to them directly. So anyhow, very successful. And I think I missed that last part. And so 2024, they continue to invest in regenerative farming equipment and processes and systems because all the money that they've saved from not purchasing genetically engineered seed, not using Roundup, not using synthetic fertilizers, not using phosphorus and potassium, they reinvest into regenerative farming, reinvest into product development of products that are compatible with the biology, like the kelps, like the fish, like the humates, and many other things, nutrients included. Now they've gotten into seed treatments because we find that inoculating seeds with the biology, with the nutrients, is very effective and cost effective. So they get a lot of their clients are purchasing or they offer a service now where they'll custom mix a nutrient biological inoculum on their seed, and they have a whole system, a seed treatment process that they can treat the seed, and they actually purchase a second seed treater because they've gotten so busy with this business. And again, it's almost like by default. It's not something they planned on doing, but they've grown rapidly with seed treatment. So that's kind of one of the things they've really got involved in. And just a side note, in December, every year they have a conference, which I'm doing this year with Ray Archuleta. And usually they have between 50 and 100 people. And this year they have almost 200 people coming to it, mostly farmers. And we also have folks from all over the world coming to it, from South America, Central America, in Europe, and in Canada are all coming down to this conference. So things are really starting to accelerate with agriculture on a much larger scale. So that's really exciting. And I'm sorry if I feel like I'm rushing this. So AgriBio, they're family farmed owned, developing their own product, totally common sense approach, driven by science, a great team of individuals. I can't be any fortunate to work with these guys. It's just a fantastic team of people. I just talked a little about the seed treating coating process that they're really actively involved in now. And when it comes to systems and logistics, these guys have really figured it out. They really have. Obviously I helped them a little bit, but they just took off with it. And I've learned so much from them at the same time. So we're going to jump into talk a little bit about this new project, working with Troy and Tony at Hinkle Heritage Farm. So I'm going to, kind of keep it an open conversation since we are really excited to have them here today to talk a little bit about this project, which I started about 1.5 years with. I think it's a very unique project because Tony and Troy are fifth generation farmers. They took it over from their dad, and I think it's a beautiful part of the country. And I just saw some really, really neat things happening there already from a conventional farm process, of seeing all kinds of wildlife. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we kind of go through the talk here. But Tony and Troy, I think you guys, we already introduced you. So I might just kind of tap off of you guys here because I might be off on some of the timelines and maybe gallons or equipment. So correct that you guys are in Vincennes, Indiana?
Yep, Vincennes. Yep.
Vincent, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah,
Which is
Vincennes.
probably from Evansville, what is it, about 30, 40 minutes?
Yeah, 40 minutes north of Evansville.
Yeah, I was familiar with Evansville's because that's where I flew into. But I'm excited to have these guys here today because this is a project I started with them about a year and a half, but I hadn't had the opportunity to actually see their operation. And for me, it's really, really important that I get my hands on, I get to see the operation, I get to look at the soil, I get to look at the plants, I get to look at the equipment, and I get to see everything around the surroundings, the plants, the bees, the birds, all the wildlife. Really important to assess a project is you got to be there as much as the technology now allows us to have these on, live meetings on the computer. It's not, you need that three-dimensionalness of a project. You got to be there. You really do. And so I was really excited to have the opportunity to get there this summer. Again, I don't know how long you guys have been no-till, but can you tell us a little bit about how long you've been a no-till and a little bit about, you're farming corn, soybean, and wheat and milo? A little bit about the livestock, Troy. I know that you just kind of started dabbling with it just a few years ago. A little bit about maybe taking the course and how we started working together. Tony or Troy, either one of you guys want to kind of talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We'll start with the last part you mentioned. So, been on the farm a long time, conventional farmers for a long time. Probably 15 years ago, we started doing some transition to no-till, and I'd say tillage was pretty much done probably 4 years ago. We stopped doing tillage and started doing some cover cropping. We never made a huge commitment to cover crops. We knew we wanted to do it, but it was just a logistical challenge. And so we were kind of dabbling in that. As you mentioned, corn, soybeans, wheat, some sorghum, grain sorghum, a few head of cattle. We farm quite a bit in river bottoms that actually flood. So that's one of our contextual challenges is land that's inundated for days to 10 days, up to 10 days a year.
Mhm.
And so we've kind of wanted to go down this road for quite a while. I've worked for the Soil and Water Conservation District here in our county for about 20 years and have been to, I can't tell you how many soil health events, and they're all great. But we were just finding a difficult time figuring out how to make that work in our context because of the flooding. And about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now, I guess, watched a presentation by a guy that was doing in-furrow application of compost extract and how he was using that to inoculate his soil and kind of jumpstart the biology and get some of the benefits of cover cropping even without the cover crop. So we had kind of an aha moment that maybe that's something that we could do. And that put us on the road. And I think in December of 2022, I started looking at the Soil Food Web course, and I can't remember exactly when I signed up for that. It was maybe in January of 23. And Tony and Trent and I talked, and we kind of made the decision in, I don't know, January or February of last year that we wanted to go down this regenerative road, whatever that was going to take. And it was kind of like jumping off a cliff in some ways. And one of the challenges that farmers have that are making this journey is you don't know who to listen to. You don't know where to get good advice. So as I was going through this online course, I noticed that there was an affiliate program or a consultant program, and I looked at the map and found Todd, and he had some experience working with farmers in the Midwest, and we thought, well, we need to talk to Todd. So we called him up and had a couple of conversations, and he agreed to take us on as clients. And so last year we started making some changes to how we do things. We've got a long way to go. We're learning a lot, some by accident, some by example.
Yeah.
But Todd has been a great help. The guys at AgriBio have been a great help. So that's kind of where we are today. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Tony.
I guess, maybe my 2 cents here is that, really we're standing on the shoulders of, Dr. Elaine and Todd and the guys at AgriBio. So we're not doing anything new. We're just diving into things that others have proved have worked. And I guess the other thing is, is sharing stories is very, very important in regenerative farming, because it's people talking to other people, or making a video that somebody else will watch and they have that aha moment. So that's the way this is going to change the way farming works around the world, is by people sharing their stories, and as often as they can.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of scary at the beginning. I was just looking down at some of the chats, and it is a big commitment to, transition, not only mentally, but, cost at the expense wise. I mean, you guys just recently purchased a large sprayer, which I'll show a picture of, for just doing the extract and doing mineral sprays. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
we could have bought a smaller sprayer that you pull behind a tractor. It would have been a far smaller investment,
mhm,
but that would, limit how high of corn you can go through.
right.
So you wouldn't be able to spray taller corn with that. So
Yep.
that's why we went ahead with that big investment. Plus, it was the year after corn was $7 a bushel and beans were 16. So
Mhm.
we had to spend that money because we didn't want to pay taxes on it.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I think I have a photo here of the sprayer.
Yeah.
So I can't remember what size boom, which boom was that? 130, 120?
This one's, I think, a 90-foot.
90 foot. Okay. So it's a 90-foot boom. This is a photo of the sprayer that you guys purchased recently. You know, these sprayers, as we all know, are really designed for spraying chemicals, and they have to be somewhat modified. One of the challenges is all the filter systems that are put in here. We want all that biology to flow through without getting caught up. And we also don't want it to sit there and ferment and go anaerobic. And we also don't want to be challenged by cleaning out every single screen. So usually the screens come out, which you guys had taken the screens out. The pumps themselves, the Hypro pumps, there's usually Hypro. They're a little smaller type roller pumps, but the good news is the back pressure is pretty low. I think it's what, 40 to 50 psi you guys are running on this sprayer.
Yeah, we actually were able to keep ours under 20 pounds.
That's even better. It's 20
Yep.
psi. That's fantastic. As long as you have the back pressure, so that then we talk about, well, what kind of tips we need to put on. Obviously, we want tips that aren't going to clog. So you guys obviously experienced some clogging with one or two of the tips, but you finally found a tip that was going to work, that allowed the biology to get out without clogging, but also you still had the back pressure. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah, these newer sprayers, they don't so much rely on back pressure, but they've got solenoids at
Right.
each tip that basically shut it off and turn it on really quickly, so that even if you don't have a lot of pressure, it can regulate how much spray goes out. So and then when you speed up or slow down, those solenoids speed up or slow down accordingly to make sure that you're spraying on the same rate.
I
So
forgot.
it's pretty
That's a
high tech
great
stuff.
point, Tony. Thank you for bringing that up. I forgot about the solenoid. Yep. And that's the beauty of the newer sprayers like that have that solenoid that dictate the allowing it to do that. So excellent point. And then one of the things that some of the modifications that you had to make, which were really minor, Tony or Troy, you want to just talk about a lot? You showed me how you kind of rerouted the hose for doing the extract into the furrows with this particular video here.
Yeah, so that's the corn planter, and it was set up to do liquid fertilizer beside the row. And so in the past, we used to apply nitrate UAN 32% beside the row planting
That's
corn.
that steel tube right here, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
so we basically just rerouted the system so that the liquid comes out in the furrow under the corn. So now instead of applying nitrogen fertilizer, we use compost extract with a combination of other things, some fish hydrolysate, some seaweed extract, and a few other things to feed the plants and feed the biology, and that goes right in the furrow. So our corn planter set up that way. That's a picture of our drill, and it's not set up that way to plant with extract in furrow, but we're planning to redo our drill this year and make it so that we can put extract in furrow. I think we'd also like to maybe, since it's a drill, we can mix our soybeans with maybe some vermicompost and or some humates, that kind of thing, and run it all out together in the furrow, so we get the benefit of having some granular product in there with the liquid extract. So that's something we're thinking about doing to get more food in the furrow for the biology to feed it right there at the roots.
Yeah, we talked about how, and this is the thing about being really creative, which a lot of farmers are like you guys, is that how can we do this inexpensively? You know, we talked about mounting 1 or 2 tanks on the back here where you're pointing with your hands there on this deck, that we could put some tanks on, either gravity feed or put some those electric pump motors on there to help, feed the extract into the furrows that way. So it's all about being as creative as you can be with some of this older equipment, but it's totally doable.
Yep.
So here we have a photo of one of your planters that you want to talk about this piece of equipment?
Yeah, this is our corn planter. This is where we saw the picture before, where the liquid's coming out in the furrow. And I'll let Todd tell the funny story on this, but so these white tanks are what we put the extract in, and then there's a pump system that pumps it out into the row units and puts it in the furrow. And I'll let Todd tell me a little bit on this one.
Let me interject here real quick before I forget. One of the modifications we had to do to this was, since we wanted to run at low pressure with no really small orifice to create the back pressure, all of the hoses and tubing that goes to each row had to be the same length so that you could run at very low pressure. Because if they're different lengths, it ends up just going out the shortest tube, and you don't get any on the far rows. So we had to add extra lines in just to make every row the exact same length of tubing, even if it needed longer or not.
That's great, Tony. Thanks for bringing that up. I remember we talked about that. And again, this is the logistics and the systems part that are so, so important. And again, because Trent's not here, which is Tony and Troy's third brother, he also was involved in some of the farming, and he was the last one to have used this piece of equipment. It's like, who was the last one that drove that car? Who was the last one that came in with all the mud on their boots? Well, I guess it was Trent. So I came up to it because one of the things I do is, that investigative work, and say, oh, I think Tony or Troy, we talked about at this point in time, we were talking about cleaning and disinfecting, I think, right? Equipment.
Yeah.
You're like, well, yeah, I'm pretty sure Trent cleaned it out, or I'm sure he flushed it out. And I said, well, that's really important, because if you don't, especially if you have any foods in there with the extract, it's going to ferment, go anaerobic, and it's going to cause havoc on the system, in the pump and the hoses and all those places you can't get to. You can't scrub those things out. That's why it's paramount that after you're finished your extract, you're out in the field, is just flush the system. It doesn't take that long. And so I said, this isn't an exam. I guess there's no sound here, but I said, this is just an exam. I'm going to test your theory out here. And I opened the valve up, and all this extract and fish hydrolysate came out that looked pretty old, and it stunk to high heaven. And I guess we were both kind of laughing at the same time. It was pretty funny. But the point is that, these little systems are really, really important, especially the logistics of cleaning your sprayer out. So we have many different ways that we do this. And one of the simplest things is just fill it with water and flush it when you're done. It's not that hard. But of course, when you have that third brother that wasn't there at that meeting or wasn't there during that logistical conversation, these are the kind of things you got to try to avoid. So anyhow, moving on, because I know our time's going quick. So here we have what's called the Bio5 extractor. I've known about it since they started developing it. I think the folks are in North or South Dakota. From what I've heard, it makes great compost teas or extract. This is the first time I had the opportunity to actually check one out. Again, we were having that conversation about quality control and cleaning and disinfecting, which I'm a real advocate of. So Tony and Troy, here's Tony looking into the tank, explaining to me how the whole thing works. And maybe one of you guys might just talk a little bit about it real quick. But what I did notice that no one really thought about or even knew is I'm always looking for that biofilm. And this looked like really almost impossible to have any biofilm. I mean, they had it squeaky clean looking down at it. But then I got underneath to look at the pump and hoses, and these feeder aerator hoses, which is the diffuser part, which is a regenerative blower right here that blows into these feeder tubes, had a bunch of residual. And I started looking at it, and it actually looked like brown tea or extract. So we don't know, but we figured it'd probably been sitting there for a few weeks, maybe months. And that is a place where things are going to go anaerobic. So unfortunately, Tony had to take it apart and by hand clean all these tubes out. But there should be a way to avoid this from happening. But this is just a gravity thing, right, guys? I mean, it's just the extract.
Yeah, we just have to keep the blower running anytime there's anything in the tank. So make sure the tank is completely, clean before you turn the blowers off. That's what we got to do, have to do to keep those lines clear.
But no one would ever thought of that or even realized this unless you got underneath and saw this and gone, oh, that's interesting. It's a little thing, but Elaine, right? I mean, how
It's
if
the
that
details.
sat there and festered for a month or two,
Oh,
that
yeah.
old extract with foods in it, can you imagine how all that anaerobic
Yeah, it just
biology?
depends on exactly what you're gonna get in that area and trying to clean it out. If you don't, you get to unbelievable smells.
Right. And it's kind of bittersweet here because Elaine's on this webinar. And back in the day when I was doing this stuff, I was these guys. And Elaine used to come to my place and I thought I was doing everything right. And every once in a while she'd go, well, wait a second, what's this? And then I'm like, and then I try to hide it and I'd cover it up and she'd go, no, pull that out. And then I'd be like, oh, I just failed the exam. And then she'd give me a whipping and then I never did it again. I learned so much from those experiences that I get to pass on to folks like this, and Tony and Troy will eventually pass this on to the folks they teach. So it's really kind of cool that we're evolving as a group, we're evolving as an industry, because we cannot afford to make mistakes. Let's just say that's a manure compost. Let's just say that's all E. coli, salmonella, whatever. That goes into that batch. That batch just gets sprayed out on the foliage of an edible crop. That goes to market and someone gets sick or dies, and they're going to go back and figure out where that came from. We can't afford that. Again, logistics and systems. It's the detail. It's the fine things that you got to focus on. So cash crop, maybe you guys can talk a little bit about this. I thought I had some great photos here. It was great to have the opportunity to go to all the different fields that you brought me to. This is that riverbed part of your property here with the soy, and very obviously silt clay, blocky soil. But I have some photos here. I thought this, maybe you can talk a little bit about this riverbed land area. The challenges and benefits, and also I was really intrigued by your little pilot project here with the organic. I think there was a naked corn that you were growing with no inputs other than extract.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you can just talk a little bit about this here real quick.
Yeah, so a couple of bean field pictures you're seeing there. I think maybe some a corn root water too. Can't see that photo, but so predominantly river bottoms. And the soils, as you can see there, are not yet in great shape, even though we've been no-tilling for quite some time, because we've not been using cover crops. We just don't have the tilth, we don't have the biology, and that's reflected in the condition of the soil. So that's one of the things that we're really looking to improve over time is better tilth, better biology, better infiltration rate. I'm sitting here looking out the window at that field right now. We got a couple inches of rain last night, and I can see that we've got some ponding out there. So I know we've got a long ways to go to get our infiltration rates up, and that'll be our kind of our report card on how well we're doing. But
It
we
should
try
be
to get
giving
our,
you a pretty,
pardon?
you should be getting a pretty fair picture about a lack of structure. Because what you
Yes.
want is all of that 2 inches of water to go down into the root system and be held
Yep.
forevermore or used by the plant. You want to be able to use that water for, you don't want to have to be worrying about puddling. It's not moving down because you don't have the organisms. And when you understand the mechanisms here a little bit better, you understand that it's worth your time to get this worked out. Get a machine made or go look and find a machine that will fit your needs.
Yep.
Yeah, one of our challenges is in the river bottom, since, it could be any time from December up through April. This land may be under, some of it's going to be under 3, 4, 5 feet of water for, hopefully only a few days, but sometimes it's a couple weeks. And so you're limited on your choice of cover crops, because if you plant a whole bunch of just rye or whatever, it's not going to survive. So the only thing that will come back after the river goes back down and continue to grow that we know of is ryegrass. And that doesn't have a whole lot of plant mass. So, we're hoping to find some other, cat or cover crop that can withstand flooding that will provide some more biomass. But so far we haven't been able to, find anything. And there are some higher spots where, we could maybe plant, some cover crops with higher biomass that won't withstand the flooding. But the low spots, definitely for sure, they're,
And
it's
I think
only
you're,
one out of every 15 years that it doesn't flood.
yeah, it's kind of like you're blaming these plants because they didn't get keep all the water in their root system. Well, let's shift what has to be done here is really more, let's find a plant that gets those roots down deep into the soil, or sand, as it kind of looks like that's your major component in your field right now. We want to make certain that all of the plants, the cash crops, cover crops that you're growing in there is putting its root system down to 10 feet, 15, 25 feet. We work with people at the University of Iowa, and sometimes I get that convinced. Well, anyway, the point is that we deal with all kinds of people asking that question. We wanted to go beyond just, oh yeah, this it's a swamp, so we have to do this and this. No, we've got to get the biology in there so that the plants can grow and get those root systems down deep, so you will never have to irrigate your crop again because it's being held in the structure of these organisms. We've got to rev them up and get them going so that we're going to benefit from this. And then, we want to make certain that that structure is built, that you're getting, probably an alternate crop if you have that sort of situation, but you got to build the organisms first.
Yeah, good
Yeah,
example is an agrobio had the same situation, and we used sorghum as a cover because it could handle the anaerobic conditions, and we have data to show this, Soil Food Web data, that things went really anaerobic during the flooding process. Once we put sorghum, the sorghum really brought back the protozoa, which was really interesting, more than any other cover. For some reason, the sorghum really enhanced the protozoa, which helped with the cycling that did not occur during the flooding. And so, like Elaine said, finding the right cover crop or crops in the process of, because you guys haven't done any covers down here yet, but just to give you a sense of direction here, this is a lowland. To the left is the house and the barn. This comes down into the lowland. And what's the name of the river here in the foreground where the trees are? Is that where the river is?
The White River.
The what?
White River.
White River. Okay. Right. So that's the river over here, isn't it?
I guess I can't see where your cursor is going
okay.
there, but yeah, but that's river bottoms. Yeah.
Yeah.
Floods.
One of the things
That
I
is-
was really impressed with is that you guys are kind of experimenting with cover crops. This is actually a video with sound, but you don't hear the sound. That you guys got a mix from Green Cover, Keith Burns, multi-species cover crop mix up to 12 different species, I think it was. Beautiful stand of cover here. And you guys just recently crimped it, right? Tony, you showed me a video of you guys crimping it like a couple weeks ago.
in early September.
Yeah, so how did that work out for you?
Worked out pretty well. So this is about 40 acres of our higher ground. It's kind of sandier soil, not very good quality. And we kind of wanted to do an experiment to see if we could bring the biology back more quickly by planting a multi-species cover crop that had a high component of C4 in it, grasses, to really pump the carbon into the soil. So we planted that this spring and just let it grow all summer. Part of it we let the cattle run on. This particular photo here did not have cattle on it, but we just let it grow all summer. And then we rolled it down with the roller crimper and planted what we planted into it. Another cover crops
A winter
mix,
mix.
a winter mix of about, I don't know, 6 or 7 different species. And we're going to let that grow all winter. And then in the spring, we're going to decide what we want to do with it. But it was just an idea to give the soil a rest from the chemistry and give it a boost from biology and from the plants and see what kind of gains we can make in the soil biology and soil quality just within a year's time by doing the soil right for a change. So we look forward to seeing what it's like next spring and getting some samples to Todd to quantify the biology and see what kind of a gain we've made on that over the winter, over I guess a year and a half.
Yeah, sorry I couldn't control the video. It was really jerky
okay.
and couldn't stop it. But there was that one strip that at the beginning of the video that for some reason, see if I can go back there. Right here to the right, that was like really dark green. What was the reason for that again? Because was it 100 pounds of N you were using, and was it overspray? I can't remember. But you'll see it in one of these pictures. That one strip going down was really much darker.
That's down Patoka.
Yeah, so that's a cornfield. So what we're looking at there, we planted a cover crop on that last fall, and it was a really dry fall, and only about half the field had a good cover crop grow on it just because it was so dry. And so what you're looking at there is the high.
That strip
Pardon?
right there.
Yeah, so that's the high part of the field there, and that yellow versus the green. The yellow is probably where we didn't get the nitrogen applicator turned on quite in time, and so that corn basically had 0 nitrogen, and the really green stuff right next to it had 100 pounds. But yeah, that's
yeah, that was.
So we cut our nitrogen rates back to 100 pounds this year, and some fields we had really good cover crop of clover and rye or barley, and so we had some nitrogen credit from that as well. So we had some pretty good corn on those acres where we had some good cover crop. Some of the lighter soils where the cover crop didn't go, the corn was not nearly as good, and you could tell the difference to where you had cover crop and you didn't. And that's somebody having a free lunch at our expense.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about? I thought this was really interesting. So you got a little experiment going there in the lowland area, and obviously the corn borer was just about on every single, I think probably almost every single kernel there or every cob, but it's that was non-BT, right? So typically most is genetically engineered BT corn to prevent this from happening. Was this a non-BT corn?
Yeah, so this was a non-GMO. So we had a 9-acre field down behind the house in River Bottoms. It had a really good stand of cover crop on it, clover and rye. And so we decided to do an experiment. We planted this non-GMO naked seed. We wanted to see what that was like. It was not a great test because it got planted really late. It was wet when we planted it. We didn't get a great stand, but we didn't do anything to it. We just planted it. We burned down the cover crop, and then we harvested it. And I think it made around 70 bushels, and that's with no nitrogen applied. And it was just interesting to see what the plants would do if you just cut them off cold turkey. And obviously the yield wasn't fantastic, and we'd have been better off financially if we'd have put a little nitrogen out there, but it was a good experiment for us to see what a cover crop and the biology can deliver to a crop.
Yep.
Even at this early stage in the game. So that,
Yeah, no, that's great that you guys
I would say it was somewhat encouraging.
Yeah. I mean, it looked beautiful here. I mean, this is that same field.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have yielded quite a bit more if we would have our planter is not really set up the best with the closing system and other things to really plant into green cover crops. So that's one area that we're looking at investment for next year is
Yeah.
putting some money into planters to get corn planter to where it will plant better, and also that field has an area along the woods and a lot of squirrels and raccoons or whatever. We're able to get to that naked seed that the planter hadn't closed the plant the slot very well, so that they were able to just go pull the seeds right out of the ground. So we lost a lot of seed to animals there. So
Yeah.
but it was when you're looking at ears this size, if we could have had a better planter, and better planting conditions and a better planter, we probably would have been, much more over 100, quite a bit over 100 bushels to acre.
Wow, that's impressive. Now, you didn't put any extract on this field.
We did it in furrow, yeah.
Yeah, so extract and cover crops. That's it.
Yeah, and we did not do a foliar spray on this field either.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that's great. Thanks for sharing that with us. With these roots, so tell us a little bit about your neighbor here. I forgot his first name. Tony?
Tom. This is Tom Rudolph.
Rudolph. Yep.
Excuse me, the guy in the foreground there, and his son back there is named Pillar. They live in Pike County, which is just down the river, up the river a little bit from us. He's been growing cover crops, multi-species cover crops for many years. He farms some really challenging land. It's very steep. It's so steep that when you look at it, you wonder how it could be farmed. How do you get your tractor up those hills pulling a planter? But he does it, and he's seen some great results. And I think he's got some ground now that will infiltrate 6 inches an hour. So he is he's kind of ahead of us on the cover crop situation. And we're when he started hearing what we're doing, he's very interested, and he's coming over. He bought some, we gave him some compost extract this year to use in his planter. So he's really excited about moving forward. And I guess that's, just a note is that the people who are serious about their cover crops are the people who are going to be, very interested in taking this next step into regenerative farming. And then also back here is behind Tom is Hillary
Dryman.
Hillary Dryman. She works with Troy at the Soil and Water Conservation Service here in Vincennes, and she's her title is a soil health specialist. So she's come out to get some exposure and see what we're doing, and and talk with us. So it's been a really great experience this summer, just being able to be involved with other farmers and people who are on the wanting to take the same journey or already on it.
Yep. And here again, this is a perfect example of what happened with Brad Brad and Adam. I say Bradham. That's how I say both their names at the same time. Bradham. I got to figure out you guys how I can say that in one word. But anyways, is that working together collectively with local businesses and local farmers, sharing information with each other and helping each other. You know, it was great that he showed up, and I was really impressed with the When These Roots Run Deep a video. If you get an opportunity to go to that video and watch it, and you can see his, I'm sorry, what was his first name again?
Tom.
Tom. You can see Tom's passion about what's happening with conventional farming. He's I think 5th generation or 4th generation, and he really wants to move the scale and take it to the next level with regenerative farming. And it's a great opportunity for you guys to work together. And I just thought it was just a fantastic day that he showed up, and he was really actively involved in you know, what you guys are doing and vice versa. So I thought it was great to I just want to, you know, talk a little bit about that, you know, Tom's involvement. And so again, we know we talked about the drainage and, you know, that real blocky, tight soil there in the riverbeds, which is really common. But I think a combination of the cover crops, putting the biology in there, you know, we're just kind of getting into the talk. We did a little bit of chemistry, and obviously we got some issues and some challenges with the chemistry. So we're going to might be putting a little bit of gypsum down and some other things with the chemistry, but we're kind of doing the chemistry, the biology, we're doing the equipment, we're doing the biology. So it's really fun. And the cover crops is another great thing. And kudos to you guys for really going into the cover crop research part of it. And I think that's fantastic. One thing I did notice with Troy as we were walking around, there was quite a bit of wildlife and insects. We saw praying mantis and monarch butterflies. And Troy or Tony, one of you guys mentioned to me that you did notice some of the I think it was the swallows because of the livestock. You know, the diversity, and you know, here's some of the livestock. Troy, you can talk a little bit about real quick, and why is this more of an experiment, or you just kind of wanted to, you know, it's a little bit about you know, I was really intrigued what you said about the birds, though. They seemed like they were flocking around the animals, going after all the insects, all the flies and stuff.
Yeah, so typically around here in the wintertime, you have these big flocks of blackbirds and flying around, and then they disappear all summer long. Well, this summer we had a flock that stayed around all year, and I don't know exactly what to attribute that, but it's just good to see life on the farm, bugs and birds and all that sort of stuff. We saw quite a few quail at our Patoka farm this year, which I've not seen before.
Mhm.
And you know, the cattle are there. You know, that was kind of my dream when I moved back to the farm 20 years ago, to raise cattle. I'd read some, you know, Joel Salatin's books, and I wanted to be Joel Salatin, and got busy and never turned into Joel Salatin, but recognize now that cattle have a place in helping to regenerate the soil. So we're
Yeah.
hoping that we can put some fence up this year and get the cattle over more acres so that they can help re-inoculate the soil, and also, you know, just add to the rotation. You know, it doesn't have to be a cash crop every year. It can be cattle being your cash crop on some of the acres every year. So they have a place, definitely have a place on the land, and we're trying to reintroduce them to that as well.
They looked really healthy. What were they, Murray Gray?
Murray Gray cattle.
Yep. And they looked well fed. And were you actually moving them into some of the cover crop fields at one point?
Yeah, so a lot of the summer they were chewing on that cover crop, and that's why they were pretty fat. That was pretty high quality forage. Not long before you showed up, they decided to come back into the pasture for whatever reason, so I let them do that. They moved
Right.
themselves, so I
Right.
closed the gate and kept them there. And yeah,
Yep.
they did get the chance to chew on the cover crop, so that, you know, that was a good bonus to the soil and bonus to the cattle as well.
Yeah, I've always been aware of it. I learned so much from my buddy Ray Archuleta, who learned from Gabe Brown. You know, the mob grazing and the amp grazing, you know, is really, really beneficial with this type of a system. And you know, it's great that you're really actively taking the initiative to try to create a complete permaculture system there. And I was really impressed on how healthy these animals looked and how they were feeding on the covers. And can you just give us a general idea of the different species in that cover crop mix?
There was some sorghum sudan grass, some millet, cowpeas, soybeans, buckwheat, sunflowers. I don't know. I think there was some kale in there, maybe a brassica or two, because it's it's still there
It's
now.
still there.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you have turnip in there?
yeah, there were turnips.
I thought I
Yeah,
saw
'cause I saw
turnip.
some turnips out there. Yep, yep.
Yep. Yeah, they love turnip.
So,
And then I think
so
you
trying to get,
actually had. Go
5 or
ahead.
6 different plant species in there to maximize the diversity. And yeah, it was good. It was pretty to watch all summer. The insects loved it. I had some flowering out there all summer long, so that was
I'm sure
benefit.
that attributed to the bird activity
Yep.
that we saw and keeping
Right.
some of the birds around here, because there's massive amounts of food in this 40 acres of cover crop for birds.
Right.
So
Yeah, I was waking up a couple of the mornings and it was so tranquil and beautiful with the animals grazing in the morning in the dew. And then you were explaining to me like all the birds were flocking in next to the animals, and you'd see all the flies on them, and the whole ecology was occurring. They were feeding on the flies, keeping the flies at sink, so you didn't have you don't spray these cattle, right? You don't need
No,
to.
that's correct.
Like the birds kind of keep the bugs away, the flies, which is just
They
awesome.
certainly help. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, I guess I'm going to move on to the next project, but I really appreciate you guys, the opportunity to have you guys here and talk a little bit about your project.
Yeah, our pleasure.
You guys are just doing an amazing job, so thank you. So I don't know how much, Carla?
Just, we have quite great questions on Q&A, and we have 45 minutes left for the entire webinar. So
Okay.
if you don't mind to just few highlights, and then we can move on for beautiful questions.
Yeah. So I'll just finish up with some
Thank
of
you.
my most recent projects is working with my buddy here, Ray Archuleta, who has become not only a colleague, but a good friend. I really enjoy working with Ray. And I had the opportunity to work on a couple big projects with him in Central America. I mentioned earlier, working with tobacco and also sugarcane. And there's very few organic tobacco companies in the world in general. And Plasencia is, from what I hear, is the largest premium cigar tobacco in the world. And I really got to know the owner quite well, and he's so passionate about regenerative farming. It is just so exhilarating to work with the owner, and he's very actively involved, and he's highly intelligent. And his organic tobacco is in such high demand that he can't produce enough. And the reason for that is, I think we all know, because there's no chemicals on it, but because of the health of the tobacco. And there's no additives in cigar tobacco, which I've learned so much about cigar. I had no idea all the uniqueness of cigars versus cigarettes. Cigarettes have what, 100 to 200 different chemicals in it. In cigarettes and tobacco cigars, there's no chemicals in it. And especially the organic tobacco is, the plant itself is in such better health that, one of the things that's unique about cigar smoking, which I'm not a huge cigar smoker, is, from the owner told me, is the taste, the smell, and the flavor is very, very unique to organic tobacco and much different than conventional tobacco. And this is the reason it's in such high demand. I believe that it's, if it's a healthy plant and you're not inhaling it, it may even be good for you at a certain level, because you're taking in all the bioflavonoids, the antioxidants, and of these healthy plants. So no one even knows. There's no data out there that has looked at, organic tobacco, cigar tobacco, but I believe it's going to be beyond, the negative effects of smoking, because you don't inhale it. And I think there's some really unique properties with it. So it's a really exciting project that I've been working on. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but I talk about the history, which, we're talking, I think it was like 1865. So we're talking about 150 years or so. This family's been in business growing tobacco. So they really have dialed in, and they're doing some really cool stuff with tobacco that it blows me away with the experimenting they're doing with organic tobacco. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but it was a great trip this summer. I was with Ray. He did the rain simulator. Ray comes from the other side of the spectrum with the NRCS, and he's a true believer of regenerative farming now. And to have someone that comes from the conventional side, it's a real pleasure to work with someone like Ray on these kind of projects, where I come in with the biology, he comes in with more the physical analysis and characteristics of soils. And then, so anyways, it was a fantastic trip. I've been working with these folks on a regular basis. This was the rain simulator, which was just so cool to watch this in real time. But we had, this is in Spanish, sorry, but it's we had 3 different soils. We had a forest soil, we had the conventional soil, we had the organics tobacco soil, and I can't remember what the 4th one was, but it worked fantastic. The organic soils out in the forest, 100% of it drained in the bottom pan through the soil profile, where the conventional, 100% of it drained right off the top, and the organic, they call it, soils was about 50-50, because it's actually they're using too much compost on top. They're not incorporating it into their soils, so it's actually hydrophobic because it dries out. So I mean, this video kind of explains it, but it's a great video that we were able to demonstrate this in real time with the whole group and the whole company. They have several thousand employees. They're in 90 countries. Really impressive company. But if you watch this video, we could provide it to you. It's really, really kind of a neat video that talks about, and I like to flip the pans over instead of just watching the drain, the water draining through or migrating through the soils in the pans. I like to flip the pans over and actually look at the soil, smell it, and then at the same time, put it under the microscope. So really, really, really cool project. I can't wait to get down there again and continue to work with these folks. But anyways, I'm sorry to drag in. They're doing some amazing fermentation of the tobacco, where they're actually aging it in cedar rooms, and it's just amazing. I've never seen anything like it. I had no idea. And it's amazing. They hand roll every single cigar, and I wish I had more time to talk about it, but again, I'm looking at, from right when they started off as a seedling into the greenhouses is where we're going to start focusing on the biology and the communities of microbes and the diversity of microbes, which they lack right from the get-go, right from that, beginning stages in the seed stage. So that genetic, component is really important to be looking at that with biology. But anyways, maybe we have another webinar. I didn't realize there was so much in here, but again, we probably should get to the Q&A. Just recently, my last visit, they had it's the rain season, and we saw all their compost running off into the rivers, and I knew this was happening, and so you can see all the leachate and the biology going bye-bye into the river because they didn't have overheads. And there was a lot of, and then we took samples and we found E. coli, and then we found they had horses above the farm. And so anyways, these are all the things that we do when we go to these projects. So anyhow, let's get to the Q&A. I apologize for rambling on, but again, we could use a couple hours here.
Oh, definitely. And nothing to be sorry about. It's fun and we learned a lot. Thank you, the 3 of you, for sharing your amazing experience. We have a promo running. I'm not gonna go for the video because we needed that extra minutes on the Q&A, but the promo ends tonight at midnight, so you still have time to join us. Please visit our website, promo.soilfoodweb.com, or ask for your questions in the chat. Our staff are gonna support you on that. The promo, we have the foundation courses are at a discounted price for $3,199, and you get stage 1 of consultant program for free. So you can hear from Todd, from Elaine, from Tony and Troy, how beautiful this promo is. So let's jump in for the Q&A. We have a lot of beautiful questions. And okay, I'm going to start with you, Todd. How did training with Dr. Elaine affect the trajectory of your business and your career? Same question for you, Tony and Troy. What would you guys recommend the training to others?
I guess I'll start. Honestly, Elaine, you messed me up. I was going in a totally different trajectory. But once I saw her speak, I'm like, oh crap, I was doing everything wrong. No, I think it was real epiphany, and I can't thank Elaine enough for that motivation, and not only that, but the friendship, the camaraderie, how much I've learned from her, and I've been able to take that along with me on every single project that I go to. And so Tony and Troy, maybe you guys can talk a little bit about.
Yeah, so the course was great in that it provided background material that you're probably not going to get anywhere else. As a farmer, you go to Purdue or whatever land grant college, you're not going to get a course in soil biology and the soil food web. So just having that background is invaluable. But then in addition to that, being introduced to a community that can help answer your questions and make connections, I mean, you just can't beat that. And you have to have that. You really have to have that if you're going to be successful in making a transition.
Yeah. Elaine, I will jump ahead of you. Taking the courses and for me, it was beautiful in so many ways, but above all, it helped me complete my big puzzle of how I'm going to help translate all the knowledge academia is developing in actions we can take to the field. So I really see the power of those courses, and doesn't matter which background you have. Of course, that you have more time, you're going to take the courses faster, but you're going to do on your own pace. So it's nothing like Tony and Troy said beautifully. You have a beautiful community to support you. We have forums, we have webinars, so you're not going to be alone. It can be scary, but we are on this together. Right, Elaine?
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
You
Okay.
guys left me with nothing else to talk about.
Sorry.
I could add to that. With the courses, it's really helped me evolve into a person and also a business where these larger projects, some of these folks don't have the opportunity to either take the course, or it might be the language barrier part, which now that you're offering it in Spanish, which is awesome. But some of these projects are so big that they have so many employees that we take the course to them. And I had the opportunity with Vivian from Doctera to teach our version of the similar course in Central America, which was a lot of fun to do the course and have the microscopes right there, and it's all because of Elaine.
Thank you, Elaine.
Got to have those critters in the soil, and if you don't know which are the right ones, you are going to flounder. You're going to be making the cover plants for the wrong cover plants that you want to get going. And it's one thing that I'm looking into now is starting to put together a food map. If you had nothing else, what would happen if you had your cover plant was X, Y, or Z? What's the reason why they would or wouldn't come along? Well, and then you decide that determine that we have to watch not only the cover plants, we've got the crop plant has to be really well understood, because as that crop plant goes through annual cycle, well, what are the cover plants doing? And we really need to get that worked on before we expect farmers to go test it out in the field.
Yeah,
Yep.
Ray defines it well. He says the cover crops do the heavy lifting. And I would say, well, what's the heavy lifting? And I guess it would be the exudates that are feeding the microbial community. Without those roots, there's no one feeding those plants in the off season especially if you're growing annual crops, and or you have perennial systems in there year round. That's to your advantage to have the heavy lifters pumping all that carbon in there, feeding all those microbes. Right, Elaine?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we got work to do tomorrow.
Which is good. So our next question is a bit philosophical, but I think that's very important because sometimes we need to stop and think back what we are doing and why we are doing this. So looking back, what each one of you would have done differently in the Regen Ag. Let's not talk about everything in life, but let's focus on Regen Ag.
Tony and Troy, why don't you guys start? I got to think about that one.
Yeah,
Oh
sorry.
boy, what have I done differently?
I don't know. I guess, part of our challenge is that we're kind of, all three of us brothers, we're kind of all part-time farmers. So, part of it was just, making a time commitment to get things done. And, particularly for getting all the cover crops planted in the, during the time you're harvesting. So you're trying to do two things at once. You're trying to plant and harvest at the same time. And last year we got about 90% of our ground planted with cover crops, and this year, happy to report we got 100%. But so I guess there's some logistics things that seed tender. Last year we did it without having a good a good system for seed transporting and dispensing seed in the field. This year we had a better machine to do that. So I guess it's just kind of, we of course wish we would have started sooner. Wish we would have, taken Todd's advice a little bit taken it more to heart to clean things better. Like I was saying earlier, a lot of farmers you don't really clean things a lot because everything on the farm gets dirty unless it's in a closed building. So anything that you're using out in the field is going to get dirty, and so you're not accustomed to cleaning things thoroughly all the time. So that's definitely something that we needed to do a better job of is getting things cleaned. I can't think of anything else right off the top of my head that.
But the two of you got the first seal of approval. You got Elaine's finger. I told you so.
I think what I would have done differently, is that what the question was? What would you have done differently?
Yeah, yes.
I would say in the mid 2000, Elaine knows this story, but I would have listened to my wife when she said, I don't think I would do that. When I got involved in a franchise thing, but I should have listened to my wife. She's always right. You got to listen to the women. They're usually right. And so that would be the first thing. And I guess the second thing would be, I wish I had done more or spent the time and money either filming or just what's the word I'm thinking of is keeping track of all my progress. Because even back in the day, Elaine would be like, do you have the data? I want to see the data. Where's the data? Data. Well, it's good to have the data. And I finally came to the conclusion the data is important because back in the 2008, when I got the lab, I started listening to Elaine and we started getting all this data, and I hired a full-time lab person, and we've got some fantastic data for about a decade because we had all these companies sending samples and we had all these products coming in and we got all these graphs, and it's just some amazing data. But I've kind of evolved now into systems and processes. I feel like that's almost as important, if not more important, than having the data. And Sammy and I had this conversation earlier, and I'm like, well, my focus is really about let's get the systems working. Let's make sure the processes are working and that we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's when it comes to the systems and the equipment. The looking at the chemistry test, following through on the results, look, doing the quantitative and qualitative. It's great to look at the data, but what are you going to do with it? It's sitting in the computer in the database. Well,
Yep.
how do you make it work in the real world? So it's the reality of it all. How do you make it realistically work? Right, Elaine, you were saying?
Yeah, but you've got to plan in advance to have those data, and then what do you do with them? You should be sitting down with your growers and showing them the graphs of the bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, and then we could do a couple mixtures of things that would summarize. You wouldn't have to go through everything individually. You put it together as you're going to hit the moon, or you are not going to be able to pass go. So I think there's a huge, we need to get using that in a different way. And so if you've got good cover crop information, let's you and I sit down, maybe you and I and Carla, other people that other SFI or the school, the school folks that would say, if we put a question out and said, who wants to help us on this? Then we would have those people. I remember when you first started writing down the data on the organisms out in the soil. It was kind of like why are we bothering to do this, Elaine? I just don't think it's going to be worth anything. Well, maybe it's just I want to remember that, but
that was a setup.
Where we are now.
You did. Exactly.
Sorry, Todd.
Yep.
Do I what?
No, I just said my answer was a setup to get you to talk about exactly what you just talked about.
Thank you, Todd.
How important the data is, because the original question from Carla was, what would you have done differently? Right? And that would be to have focused more on the data and to be able to utilize it with the client, like Elaine just explained. Exactly. And so that they understand in a more simplistic way, because it is complex when you're first learning about it. There's a lot going on. But how do we take that information and then how do we take it to the next level out in the field, in the real world? And there's so many challenges to that because there's so many variabilities of everybody's operation, including the weather. And so, like Tony and Troy is a good example. They had some older equipment, but then they really needed a piece of equipment that was expensive because their systems and their process, their fields, their farm it's a very unique system, and so everybody's, for me, every project I've been on has been different and unique. Even though there's some similarities to it, everybody has something very unique to it, and it all comes down to how do you utilize the data? How do you utilize the information that you're learning from the school, including quantitatively what you're looking at in the soils, in the compost, and in the extracts? And how does that respond in the program? And how do you monitor it by keeping track of the data? Right, Elaine?
Yep, absolutely. I think of the times when people have asked, what's this whole carbon to nitrogen ratio, and what good is it? You just throw the foods into the compost pile and you don't worry about it. Oh, yes, you do. But if you're not looking at the temperatures, you're missing those first 2 or 3 peaks. You might as well just put all of your compost into a sterilization mode and put that out, and not going to see the results that we want to see. So the same thing with fungal to bacterial ratios. That was something that we didn't have enough data on when I first started Soil Food Web. And as I looked at enough samples, I started to see the patterns, where as you go in the springtime and the seed is just beginning to germinate and go along. You're looking at this is becoming more and more bacterial with time, or this is becoming more and more fungal all the time. So how do you deal with something that could be this or could be that? Well, what is it that could be that? What makes that hang together as a group? Whereas over here, you get a different ratio, and you notice that it's always going to be, plants that have the foods in its root system to feed all kinds of bacteria, and so a bacterial-dominated food web. And that's telling you something really, really important about your soil, about the health of the plants, about the ratios of food that is being put into your soil. Go to fungal dominated. Now you're starting to see things that are way more moved along that successional chart. So those things would never have been discovered, or they would take another 50 years, 100 years to discover those ratios and that they're meaningful. So now when we're looking at cover crop corn, soybean, the things you're particularly growing, what are the patterns there? Have you been looking at them? Have you been spending at least a little time starting to see that you are the really high in the fungal to bacterial biomass fight that's going on, and that's what I think of, that fungal to bacterial biomass ratio. Those organisms are most of the time are fighting each other because these guys want to be at the top and only let these species grow. Well,
Yep.
then they get sabotaged from behind because now it's going to become way fungal. And now we have certain kinds of mycorrhizal fungi that start to unless you have the right bacterial predators, fungal predators, you're going to, again, turn your soil around and you're going to be growing something that you don't really want to grow. You want to be growing this stuff up here. What's making the difference? So, yeah. And then we
It's a
have
beautiful, a beautiful fast summary of FC courses, Elaine. I'm going to change for another subject, because when we have thought around this question, or something similar to that, it's recurrent, and I think that's a very beautiful one. It is a pleasure to attend this webinar. Thank you, Kenneth. Can you talk on how we can attain biocomplete vermicompost, and if vermicompost is a viable option for being biocomplete?
You really do want to have it present because it's a balance of a group of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes. Like the question I just sort of answered, we haven't looked long enough at the balances. What does it mean? And and a lot of people, I hear them saying, throw this out because I can't make heads or tails of it. Well, you're going to have to do better, or you're going to be back there with the folks that have never done anything to fix the environment for their plants so that they would produce max benefits for human beings. So it's not just production, it's what's inside those plants. And when you take a short stick of your favorite crunchy food and you chomp down on it, what else are you getting? Not just food, but disease suppression from a human point of view.
Yep. Todd?
Can you repeat the question, Carla, again, just so everyone?
Yes, it's about vermicompost. What's your experience? Can you achieve biocomplete levels with vermicompost, and which are the benefits?
Yeah, I think there's pros and cons to the vermicompost versus what, thermophilic compost or static compost. Um, I think it has its place for me and for us. There's certain things that we can do. We can manipulate the microbial communities in the minerals a little bit more accurately when we're going through the mesophilic stage, vermicomposting wise, with a lot of my clients, including what we've done. Um, and it's more controllable because we have control over it in a CFT type system or even a batch system, where a lot of the thermophilic composting on a larger scale outside with the equipment, Mother Nature is challenging to control. So there's less controllable things out in the environment, like when you're dealing with the moisture and the heat, and like I showed you earlier, the heavy rains in South America, unless you have an overhead, you're going to be really, really challenged doing it outside with the windrow turner. Um, and so some of the downfalls with vermicomposting, I think, is that it's because it's a continuous process that, the microbial communities, especially the higher level predators, the nematodes and the fungi, for example, they're very sensitive to slicing and dicing, to moving. And so when we do our vermicomposting, we have many different recipes we've evolved and developed, from more fungal to more balanced fungal to bacterial, to no minerals to some minerals. Um, and we have the ability to do that a little more accurately in a CFT, but I find that the numbers are more challenging and consistent with fungal and nematodes, for example, because it's a continuous flow through system, and we find that when we rest the castings and when we give it time to cure, those numbers tend to come back. And then there's certain things we might do to manipulate to have to put more fungal foods or do a nematode inoculation to get those numbers back up in the vermicompost, where a good thermophilic biocomplete compost can have all those organisms at all those ratios that we want them at. So again, I think there's benefits in both, and there's also some detriment in some of them where thermophilic, if you're not quite sure, you're using a lot of manures and the temperature, there may be a pocket here and there that never really went fully, aerobic, and you might have a pathogen in that pocket. It's gonna transfer to the finished material. Where the earthworms, the vermicomposting is like that second check system. It's that filter system that they do a pretty good job at removing pathogens. So that, if we're doing I feel and more confident when I take a thermophilic compost and then run it through a mesophilic process, like with the earthworms. It seems a little bit cleaner. There's less chance of any pathogens. And if we're doing extract, I feel a little more confident, especially if it's a project that I'm not right there. If it's overseas or something, I try to reduce the risk factor. If they're using any kind of manures, I'm like, all right, let's just run through the worms too, just because I'm not there and I'm not quite sure you guys are doing it right, because of that challenge of doing it outside with a machine. The recipes might change and they're like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, we didn't have this particular nitrogen source, so we ended up getting it from a pig farm down the road, and it had, some nasty stuff in it. Well, why didn't you tell me about that? Maybe that's where the E. coli came from. So my point is that that's kind of where I see the pros and cons to both.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And
What a lesson. Thank you.
at least,
Tony and Troy, sorry, Elaine, go ahead.
just real quick, one of the good reasons to do the assessment of the bios, how much E. coli or Salmonella, Shigella, those guys might have happened, is to do looking at your samples with a microscope.
Yep.
So that you learn immediately. You don't have to wait for the end of the growth period. You don't have to wait for the samples to come back from the laboratory. You take the sample, you look at it using your microscope, and you go, those really look like the bad guys. And so you know that you do another turn, you get out there with something a little drier. Ta-da.
Perfect example was in the early part of my talk. I showed placentia. I showed you the the compost facility with it pouring out, and you saw the leachate, and their compost assessed out really good. We used it in the course, but then we took that leachate and put it under the microscope, and it was loaded with, we saw the spirilla, we saw Vibrio, we saw all these, bad organisms in there. And we're like, well, there's a perfect, like, why is that in here leaching out of your really good compost? And then they're like, oh, well, there's a horse farm just above the compost facility. Oh, really? And so we did a little, forensics, and we found out there was all this manure that was right above the farm, the compost operation. And we're like, okay, we got to reroute this, figure out a different system. So that's a perfect example right there.
Be a detective, right? Like you said in the presentation.
Right. What Elaine said, though, that you got to test your compost.
True. Yep.
Got to test everything if you possibly can.
Right.
Yeah. So the next question, it's from Charles, and I think that applies for Todd, Tony, and Troy. You talked about what it takes or involved in making sure that the spraying equipment is not having a negative effect in biology when you are applying. You mentioned the York brothers and also the adaptations you did with the Rico brothers. Do they have a dedicated sprayer? Is that the only way? How do you manage that in the daily basis?
Well, I'll start here, and then I'll let Troy and Tony kind of add to it, because they're just starting with this experience. But there's a lot of clients that I've worked with, including AgroBio, and they're not brothers, but it's actually Adam and Brad. They're two individuals. They started off originally using a conventional sprayer to do the biology, and assessing the equipment. I mean, it's like, they were using Surflin, like some of these nasty herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides, especially the fungicides. I mean, we know how toxic fungicides are to the microbes, especially the fungi. But there's some herbicides, the residual, these powders, are almost near to impossible to get out of these sprayers, because they create crust and they get in corners and cracks inside the spray equipment. You just can't get them out. So that residual is always there. And yet they obviously are using that same equipment. So the quality of that biology at the beginning, once it goes into the tank and it circulates to the sprayer, the hoses, and the pump, and back in it, and they all have to go circulate back into the tank before it gets sprayed out. So that's constantly circulating. It comes in contact with these chemicals. No matter how good you are at cleaning, there's no way you can get in there unless you got little gremlins that you send in to actually, scrape this stuff. It's like going to the dentist and having a cleaning, right? So you got that plaque that's inside the hoses, the valves, and the pumps that you cannot get out with any kind of cleaner. So you're always going to be challenged with that equipment. And so you might have a grade 10 of an amazing biocomplete compost, but by the time it comes out of that spray tip, you're down to a 4 or 5. And we've seen this because we've assessed it. We look at it before it goes in the tank, and then we look at it when it gets sprayed out of the sprayer. And we're like, well, where did everybody go? So again, you got to really think about this stuff, and it's worth the investment because of that fact alone, as far as I'm concerned. But maybe Tony or Troy, you guys can add to that.
Yeah, so our concern going into this was we didn't have a sprayer, and anything that we had sprayed, we had the local co-op do. And so we thought, well, it's probably not going to work very well if they're out spraying pesticides, herbicides, whatever. And then they come to our farm, we load it up with our compost extract. We have no confidence that they've cleaned out the system. And so it was just a huge unknown. And then out of that, it's a timing factor. So when you're,
so you
when
had
you're doing,
excuse me. So you had the co-op spraying your compost extract.
no.
Oh, you didn't.
But they would do all of our herbicide applications and that sort of stuff.
Oh, so you were just, it didn't make sense when you were thinking about it. Okay. But you still were putting biology out just in furrow.
We started it all at the same time. Yeah.
Oh, you did. Okay.
Yeah. So part of the reason for the sprayer as well is when you're doing foliar applications, timing can be pretty critical. And our co-op guys are really accommodating, but I can't ask them to go out at 9 o'clock at night or at 5 o'clock in the morning when the conditions are right to do a foliar application. So we just decided if it was going to be done right, we were going to have to take it upon ourselves to do it, and that just meant an equipment purchase.
Awesome. Yeah,
Great.
thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Todd, when you make gardens or any other project and you add the right biology, and when you reach the point the biology balances out, is there a need to come back, for example, 2 or 3 years after the restoration is at the level of the desired biology? Great question, Steen. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I get people asking me that all the time. It's like, well, once we get the organisms in balance and we get the ratios right and with all the critters are there, do I have to continue to keep putting compost tea down or compost? And the answer is, Elaine does this to me all the time. It depends. Depends on so many other factors like what's the season going to look like here in New England, for example. We typically get, a sufficient amount of rain and in the fall. And we've had like no rain this year in the fall. I've never seen it ever this dry. And when it's dry and the soil gets dry, then the biology and ecology dries up. Some go dormant and some don't. Some die off. So the ecology, biology, the chemical, the physical characteristics of the soil is completely change. So yeah, you got to monitor the biology by testing it, but there's a feast and famine. I mean, just weather patterns are changing drastically with climate change. And so we have to continually, introduce the foods, the biology because of the change in climate. I mean, but it's like permaculture. You got to have the whole system in play. You've got to have the cover crops, which are going to help during the drought. You've got to have, the systems in play with making high quality compost, hopefully local compost. You're making it yourself. So you got that indigenous communities of microbes that you're putting down. So it's one of those things where it really depends. I mean, in a perfect world, in perfect weather, and you're cycling, you're rotating, you've got livestock, you've got cover crops, and you got ideal weather. In time, Mother Nature should be able to just continually cycle and be sustainable, regenerative, but unfortunately it's not always that perfect world out there. I mean, I'm sure Elaine could add to this, but it's a great question. It
Yeah.
depends, Elaine.
Yeah, it depends. And, think about all of the things that could be dependent on just a huge number of other things. You've got to be present to add or subtract the it depends part of that response. There's nothing like having just a little, paragraph on what was so strange. By the time the third, down in there's another hurricane coming our way, and so it's I think out of we've had years that are 2 to maybe 3. Well, this is more like the 5th to the 7th time we'll have a hurricane coming through this year. What's that going to do to all of our, think about your pasture or that area where you had, the whole entire valley bottom really was this really good looking sample. And yeah, 4 hurricanes, what are those going to do? It's
Right.
we've got
That's a really good example, Elaine, when soils go anaerobic for long periods of time because of the flooding that occurs. And I know Tony and Troy deal with this every spring, and it varies on how much flooding you guys get. But I mean, you spend like a week or two just cleaning up all the debris, let alone waiting for the soil to, dry out. And, but I'm sure in time that you can make your soils more resilient to these weather pattern changes, right? I mean, organic matter, cover crops during drought, getting the soil that it can actually drain better and absorb the water better. And we see this time and time again from all these projects. Elaine has a lot of great projects she talks about where the soil can actually absorb enormous amount of rainfall, where when in the past with the chemicals, it doesn't, it just runs right off.
Yeah, and Todd, to complement, because this was one beautiful question in the chat as well. Tony and Troy, how do you guys work after the flood? Like Todd mentioned that you clean the debris, but how do you interact with the biology? Do you have to reapply? You start from ground zero? How is this progress going on for you guys, seeing the action of the soil food web in your property?
Yeah, this kind of gets back to the thing that Elaine and uh, Todd were talking about earlier is the data. We haven't done a lot of soil testing yet to quantify where the how much life is in the soil before the flood and after the flood, and a month after the flood and that sort of thing. Right now we're just going with a standard program. We put compost extract in furrow to make sure that for our crops that it's got the right things, the right bacterial and fungal life right there in furrow to take off. And in the river bottoms, we may have to do that forever. And there are other conditions where we may have to do that forever, as for the rest of our lifetimes, before the soil really gets in good enough shape to where it can just take off and go. But a lot of this is gonna, it's like everything else. If something bad happens to your soil, whether it's a flood, whether it's erosion, whatever, you've got to counteract that some way, shape, or form with your management practices so that you can continue moving in the right direction. And one of the things that I think of down in the river bottoms was, over in the past they used to till all that. You'd maybe plow it in the fall, and the river would come out and wash inches of it away, and sometimes. So we've stopped a lot of that erosion from happening now, and hopefully what we're doing now will actually start to build that soil up. And it may take 30 years to get another inch of soil, but after hopefully after centuries of this go on, that land will actually be higher than it is today, so then less of it will flood. And also, if all the farmers upstream from us start start managing their fields with regenerative practices, there's going to be less flooding down here, because the rainwater will infiltrate into the soils instead of running off into the streams and coming down to us. So there's once you start answering one of these questions, there's so many different rabbit holes you can go down.
Yeah.
That's true.
If it depends has a million answers to it.
Yep, it sure does.
You got to go look at somebody else, talk to everybody, somebody who has similar situations. My attitude is almost always going to be, it doesn't take 100 years to move the biology to what you want it to be. Probably the worst situation I've ever seen. If you're really going in there with good compost, you're checking and you're making certain everything's going the right way. 3 applications is all it should take. But you got to make sure it's correct for the conditions that you are in. So
That's really good biocomplete compost too, which we don't see that often. But I mean, you guys have done some testing. I mean, we got Neil and Patoka. We did some baseline biological tests, quantitative, and obviously it's a real classic chemical looking soil, all bacterial. But at least you guys made the initiative. You've got baseline tests done.
And now you know where to go, where you want to direct things, and what needs to be in that compost or your extract or whatever you're putting out.
One of the other factors that we have to think about with the river flooding is that we're getting chemicals from other people's farms coming onto our farm. So we have no idea at this point how much that's going to affect the biology as well. But every time it floods, it's bringing in all the weed seed and everything else, and so there's going to be some chemicals and fertilizer and everything else, whatever's on their field, upstream that gets flooded, it's going to come down to our field. Not necessarily flooded, but what runs off is going to be in our field. So, river bottoms, we may have to inoculate, forever. We don't know.
Part of that depends. Yep.
Because you're
Depends,
getting
yeah.
chemicals, you're getting fungicide from other people's farms.
Yeah.
And that's going to impact your biology. We just don't know how much yet.
Right.
And we need to know, get a good effect, knowing what that contamination is washing onto our fields.
Mhm.
So that maybe we always need to think about right after it's stopped raining, we need to be out there and get that biology back into the soil that would decompose all the toxic chemicals. So far, we haven't found any materials that won't be consumed, decomposed by the microorganisms. They're out there, they're ready. Let's use what Mother Nature has just handed us.
And it seems that Elaine already gave us the theme for the next webinar series, how we can use a soil food web to clean up soils everywhere. So sorry, but we have to cut here. I'm having a lot of fun, learning a lot. I want to thank every one of you guys that spent these 2 beautiful hours with us. Want to reinforce that the replays are available at our website, including the webinar from today. In a couple hours, we'll be there. So don't forget to chime in, rewatch. There is tons and tons of beautiful tips, lessons, and next steps. Thank you so much, Todd. Thank you so much, Tony and Troy. And in the name of the school, we really had a lot of fun and hope to see you guys soon. And I also want to ask a round of applause for our staff team. Without you guys, we would not be here. Thank you so much. And once more, Dr. Elaine, we know how busy you are.
Guys.
Thank you for taking the time to be here with us. And don't forget, the promotion ends at midnight today. If you need help, check our social media or email us at info@soilfoodweb.com and someone will be there to help you.
Great.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Don't forget to click that like button,
and
subscribe to our channel, and
Troy.
ring the
Thank
notification
you
bell
much.
to
That
stay
was-
updated with all our new
Talk to you
videos.
soon.
You've got the
Carla.
DVD I'd like to see. Take care.
Bye.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Until the next.
Yep.